While Scott was blipped for 5 years, his daughter Cassie built a device to communicate with the quantum realm in an attempt to bring Scott back. Fast forward to present day, and she presents this invention to her dad and the rest of her family, and it suddenly malfunctions and sends all of them into the quantum realm with no immediate way of getting out. And inside the subatomic universe lies a menacing ruler, often referred by the people of the quantum realm as the Conqueror. Compared to a lot of the negative critical reviews that have gone around about this film, I actually enjoyed it quite a bit, and I went in to see it a second time, and my thoughts didn't really change. However, conclusively, I will say, before I get in all my detailed thoughts about the actual film itself, I do think it was better than the last Ant-Man film, but I still think the first one is the best in the franchise, and I think it's probably one of the most underrated films in the entire MCU period. But I really enjoyed Ant-Man Quantumania, and we'll get into all the, my positives and my negatives, and we'll break it down classic review style. But when I approach these Marvel films, it's very much from 2 points of view, and this is really exclusive to not even just comic book films, but Marvel films, because when these come out, they are events. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that terminology before. They're like mini holidays, so to speak. So my first viewing is very much from that fanboy perspective. I'm just excited to get my ass in the theater, get a big bucket of popcorn, and enjoy the film. And then when I go in for the second viewing, that's when the critical eye kicks in. That's where I pay attention to more of the nuances and the details of the stories that I'm watching. So I've seen the film twice. I got a good grasp on how I feel about it. Now let's get into all the positives and the negatives. We're going to start off with the positives. I'm going to go through each one bit by bit, and then we're going to go in and conclude with the negatives. So, of course, one of my favorite parts of the film, as I'm sure a lot of you will agree, was Jonathan Majors as Kang the Conqueror. Yes, not He Who Remains from Loki, but this is the Kang variant that a lot of people have been wanting to see. And this performance was great. I loved it, but it was very different from He Who Remains. And I like that distinction because given that this is a multiversal character and we're going to be seeing many different iterations of him, obviously the post-credit scene, we see the Immortus variant, we see the Scarlet Centurion variant, we see the Ramatut variant. This performance Jonathan Majors gave was a nice distinction, and I'm sure we're going to see that with all the other versions of Kang, and we're going to see like the Victor Timely variant. But unlike He Who Remains, who was very chaotic in his nature, very eccentric, flamboyant, just kind of giddy, so to speak, this variant of Kang was soft-spoken. He had a cadence in his tone. There wasn't any wasted movements. He seemed very calculated while also maintaining a very menacing and threatening presence. One of my favorite scenes of Kang, and probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire film, was when he first met Scott, and of course he proposes this sort of you help me, I help you scenario with Ant-Man, when he asks him to get his multiversal engine, and when Ant-Man declines the offer, while not yelling, while not shouting, with a simple gesture of his finger, he just starts throwing Scott around and levitating him, and he tells him in a very terrifying, but like I said, calm manner, without shouting, he tells him, I will kill your daughter in front of you, and I will repeat that moment and make you watch it over and over until you ask me to kill you. That was probably the moment in the film where I think a lot of you, myself included, realize like this guy is the real deal. So I'm hyped. I think Jonathan Majors is a great actor. Every time I see him in interviews, you could see that excitement, and obviously he knows more than anybody else his future as a character. So I imagine he probably, because he's essentially playing a new character every time. It's obviously Nathaniel Richards, but it's going to be the Ramatut variant. It's going to be, as I said, the Immortus variant, and all require a little bit of a different approach with the character, different voice, different body language. And this variant of Kang just had a presence to him. Like even when he was talking to Janet in the flashback scenes, his nature came across as very pathological. And to be honest with you, I think that while the end of the film implies that he's dead, I actually think that this specific variant of Kang that was banished by the council will return and actually end up being the strongest Kang variant, and or as the comics refers to as the Beyonder. I think he will come back as the Beyonder variant of Kang. Well, it's kind of confusing. They'll have to do some adaptations, but I think he will come back as the Beyonder in Secret Wars and be even stronger. And then I think Scott and Hope are going to look back and think, wow, at that moment we thought we took him down, but in reality, we actually inadvertently made him stronger. So I love the performance. It was probably my favorite part of the film. Now let's move on to my next positive. So other than Jonathan Majors, I actually think Michelle Pfeiffer gave the best performance in the film, and she was really the connective tissue with the entire Ant-Man family, which I would have liked to see a little bit more with Scott, but we'll get into that later. But her performance was great. She really makes you feel the danger of Kang. There's many times throughout the film that we see the different people living in the quantum realm, and they refer to Kang as either him or the Conqueror. It's very few times that we actually hear the name Kang, and it's usually only spoken from our main characters because they haven't lived in the quantum realm, so they haven't experienced the pure destruction and catastrophe that follows this maniac ruler. But even beyond that, I mean, her chemistry with Kang and the flashback scenes that I talked about earlier, that was great. And then that scene where they're sort of setting up the chair, the multiversal chair that Kang has, and they're about to power the battery, and they're about to take off out of the quantum realm, and she sees Kang's past in a little quick montage, and she sees all the things that he's done, the genocide, and the expression on her face was that of just pure fear and terror. And that, of course, is a compliment because I think Michelle Pfeiffer is probably the best actress out of the entire cast, and she just pulls off a great performance. We obviously know that she was trapped in the quantum realm, so she's obviously made some enemies. She made some friends, but then some of those friends, Krylar, might have felt betrayed by her when she left the quantum realm. So for me, she was definitely a highlight, probably my second favorite character of the entire film. And hopefully we see her again. Let's move on to the next positive. Now, this next thing that worked for me in the film, for a lot of you, will probably be your least favorite part of the film. So curious to see how you guys feel. Let me know down in the comments below when it comes to MODOK. But for me, I think what they did with MODOK worked. Now, I'm hearing a lot of people criticize just in general how he looked, the visual effects of him. And to that, I'll say he's a character that's a floating head with little arms and legs. I don't quite know what some of you were expecting to see. I think it was always going to be a given that he was going to look strange, and I don't think the visual effects were even that bad for a character like him. I think they did the best that they could, but beyond that, a lot of people are also criticizing how obviously Marvel has a history of, adapting from the comics, but not just doing a beat by beat copy of these certain stories that have been told from the page, and obviously that makes sense because things have to fit within the confines of the MCU. For me, yes, it is true that they did deviate very much from MODOK's actual origins, but I think once again, the MCU did it in a way that ties back to other things that have happened in the MCU, and more specifically, them making the decision to make MODOK Darren Cross. I think credit to Jeff Loveness, who wrote the script. It ties things back nicely, making it actually feel like a conclusive trilogy. And there's other things that they pay off too. There's that scene in the first Ant-Man. It's either the first or the second when Cassie says to Scott, when she's just a kid, she's like, I would be a great partner. Now, of course, we see Cassie growing up, and now she's probably going to end up being one of the Avengers. So little things like that, they paid off. But for me, MODOK worked. I actually liked the way he actually looked. I think it was pretty comic book accurate for the most part. And I just think, just to be honest, I just think he was fucking hilarious. He was probably the comedy, obviously every MCU film has a little bit of levity sprinkled here and there, and I think he definitely brought that in a way that didn't take away from the story. And like I said, I just think it ties back nicely to the first Ant-Man film. And one of my favorite moments in the film was when he died and he looks at Scott and he's like, so I'm glad I died an Avenger, and then Scott sort of lets him have that moment. Little things like that worked for me. But yeah, for me, MODOK was definitely a positive. So anytime I hear about Kevin Feige hiring a writer who has little to no experience, I always get a little bit apprehensive. But then again, Kevin Feige has also proven to have one of the best eyes for talent in Hollywood. Obviously, when he hired the Russo brothers, I think they had only done a couple of TV shows, and then even the writers for Avengers Infinity War and Endgame had little to no experience. So he has a great eye for talent, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt when I found out that this guy, Jeff Loveness, was writing the script. And Jeff Loveness, he's done some stuff. He's written some episodes of Rick and Morty and some other television, but this was his first feature film that he was writing. And for those of you who don't know, he's also going to be the writer for Avengers KANG Dynasty. And while I don't think it's a perfect script, it's certainly not the best script that's been written in the MCU. I think for a guy that's writing his first feature film, I think he did a great job. And a lot of his sensibilities that he might have actually pulled from Rick and Morty that involves a lot of multiverse, a lot of time travel, you can see that he gets that. He could bring that, right? They can hire a lot of writers, but if they don't have those sensibilities, and you could tell that he's done a lot of research as well. I'll probably try and plug it in the video. There's a clip of him on the red carpet talking about his writing process, and more specifically the future with Kang and how he's diving into a lot of the comics.
What was it like to be able to delve into so much of this stuff? I mean, we've got the quantum realm, we've got freedom fighters, we've got Kang the Conqueror.
Yeah.
You get to play with a lot of the action figures in this movie.
Absolutely. No, I grew up reading Marvel comics. They basically taught me how to read X-Men and Spider-Man comics. And like a guy like Kang has been written so well from everyone from like Stan Lee to Kurt Busiek to Rick Remender. I mean, he has touched every corner of the Marvel universe, and he can go toe-to-toe with anyone in the Marvel universe.
As a fan, you want the people penning these projects and the creative people behind it. You want them to be as passionate about it as you are. When you see them talking about, they're doing their history, I mean, that should always be a given, but sometimes it isn't. So when you see people like Jeff Loveness and these interviews, and you could just see the passion bleeding out of him, it's encouraging as a fan. But getting back to the film, I think the things that worked for me was his ability to embrace the weird. And I'm sure he obviously had to get permission from Kevin Feige, but how he wrote the quantum realm felt, there's a lot of parallels to Star Wars, obviously. I loved it. And for me, I know a lot of people have a problem with this, and a lot of people have accused Quantumania as just being set up for, the Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars, but for me, that actually is part of the draw. And I think if you've been a fan of the MCU as long as you have, that's sort of an expectation with some of these films. It is what it is. And I think how Jeff Loveness wrote all the exposition involving the multiverse, incursions, Kang, I loved it. And now I feel a lot more comfortable with him writing the Kang Dynasty. And like I said, for a guy that's written his first script, a big studio script, an ensemble, so to speak, not an Avengers film yet, but still quite a lot of characters that you have to write for, and his ability to write out the quantum realm as this lived-in universe, I thought was pretty good. So the things that I don't like. Now, by a lot of the praise I've just been throwing the film, you probably think I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10. And I'm not. I do have some issues with it. And the first thing I'm going to talk about, as I'm sure a lot of you have heard, and I have to agree, is the visual effects. Now, specifically, my problem with the visual effects is the environmental visual effects. Everything involving the characters, when Ant-Man was actually shrinking and going to Giant Man, that all looked great. Even when Kang was using his powers and kind of maneuvering around and everything, all of that was fine. My problem was the quantum realm. Now, you could tell there's practical, the foreground is built. You could see that the rocks and everything like that is there, the things that they're standing on. But off in the distance, you could just tell that they're shooting on the volume stages. And I know that this has kind of been an experiment for Marvel. They've deviated away from using green screen. And I understand why, the volume stage allows for the actor to sort of buy into the sandbox that they're playing in, so it can aid in their performance. But man, it just does not look good. And that's not to say that they don't still use green screen. Of course they do, but I can always tell which scenes are being shot on the volume stages and which scenes aren't. Because it's not all bad, but more times than not, the visual effects just did not look good. And as I mentioned, it pretty much just has to do with the environment around them. I would say 90% of the time, I could just tell that they were shooting on the volume stages. And they've done it now with Love and Thunder. They've done it with this film. I just don't really think it works very well. And to be honest, I think they might just have to go back to the green screen. So I think this film had a problem with its protagonist. And I'm not saying anything, it has nothing to do with Paul Rudd's performance, but Paul Rudd wasn't even really the main protagonist in his own film. And I had this exact same problem with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. If you break down that film at its core, it's really about America Chavez. And Doctor Strange is pretty much just there to protect her from Wanda. It's not even really his film. Yes, he shares the majority of the screen time, and we're seeing the story play out from his perspective. But at the end of the day, at least in my opinion, Doctor Strange felt like a supporting character in his own film. And I feel very similar to Antman. And don't even get me started on Hope. You know, as much credit as I just gave Jeff Loveness's script, I think easily the weakest part of his writing in this film was Hope. And I actually am a big fan of Hope. I've liked her across these last two films, but she really had nothing to do. I mean, yeah, she came in, she saved Ant-Man a couple of times, but other than that, I mean, she pretty much had nothing to do in this film. And for a film called Ant-Man and the Wasp, you'd think that she'd have a lot more of an impact, and she was by far the least interesting character. But then going back to Ant-Man, it's similar to Doctor Strange. He has most of the screen time. We're seeing things play out through him. But really, at its core, the protagonist of this film, the glue, is Janet Van Dyne because of her history in the quantum realm that was set up from the previous film. So, you know, that essentially this is a problem I have with the writing. And as I mentioned before, when I was giving my sort of preamble before getting into the things I liked, I enjoyed the script, I enjoyed the writing, but there are some problems, and I would say this is one of them. So my last criticism is the runtime, and I'll keep this one quick. There's not a lot I'm going to go into on this, but overall, I think the runtime was okay, but Marvel has been doing this thing, with the exception of a film like Black Panther, that really demanded that extra runtime to obviously address things like Chadwick Boseman. A lot of these MCU films in Phase 4 have been like just floating around that 2-hour mark. I don't know if this is some kind of mandate at Disney to keep the films shorter or whatnot, but this film was 2 hours and 5 minutes long, and the example I think of is the final fight, because the final fight is probably the least memorable part of the film because it just happens. It just goes by so quick. And I think with an extra maybe 10 to 15 minutes sprinkled throughout this film and a lot of the lion's share of that given to the final fight, I think the film could have ended off with a better climax, so to speak. And I'm not saying devote all 10 to 15 minutes if they were to add that just specifically to the fight scene. I think there's other moments in the film that could have used a little extension in time, maybe some of the flashbacks with Janet and Kang, but that final fight with Scott, Kang, and even Hope a little bit sprinkled in, I just think it was too short, kind of just came and went. And as I mentioned, there's other moments of the film that are more memorable than the climax, which is supposed to be the part of the film that you think about the most at the end of the runtime. So that is my last sort of negative about this film. Now let's get into my score, and I'm going to give you some sort of rounding out of, conclusive thoughts on where I think the MCU is going to be going in the future. So now I've given you my positives, I've given you my negatives, and to kind of circle back and bring it all together, I think this film is quite good, and I do think it's better than many of the films that have come out in Phase 4, with the exception of Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. This film, I had a great time. It's been a hot minute since I've watched a Marvel movie, and I've wanted to go back right away. I didn't have that with Love and Thunder. I didn't have that with Multiverse of Madness. I didn't have that for Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, but that's because that was a really emotional MCU film. Obviously, as I mentioned, I had to deal with things like, Chadwick Boseman, but I saw this film again the day after because I had a good time. Obviously, I pointed out some of the flaws, and I think that some of it, like with Hope, I think was a huge misfire because I really enjoyed that character in the other two Ant-Man films. And even Hank, I mean, both of them just felt relegated as just there because they had to be there contractually. It didn't really feel like they actually served a purpose. Now with Hank, I know a lot of you are going to argue that he came in for the final sort of punchline against Kang. And yes, absolutely. And even Hope, they came in at crucial moments, but they felt like other than that, they felt like they sort of just blended in throughout the rest of the film. So they were technically important to the narrative. It's not like they serve no purpose, but it's almost like where we saw them in the last film, even the performances felt different. But overall, I liked Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. I think it's definitely a great start to Phase 5, especially teeing up everything with the Kang Dynasty. I'm so happy, and this is once again a credit to Jeff Loveness, how the MCU is embracing the weird. And now that Jeff Loveness has written this film, he kind of has a good grasp on Kang. He's essentially introducing Kang for the first time. I know that we had He Who Remains in Loki, but this is pretty much the style of the character we're going to see moving forward, even though we're going to get several different variants. But let me give you my score. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. I thought it was good. It was quite good. Not great, not amazing, but I don't think it's mid like a lot of people are saying, and I don't think it's bad like a lot of people are saying. That's just my opinion, but overall, I'm optimistic about the future of the MCU. I think we're in good hands. As long as we have Kevin Feige at the helm, I'm going to always give him the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, are you guys excited for the future of the MCU? Kang Dynasty, Secret Wars. We have Michael Waldron writing Secret Wars. Let me know what you guys think. How did you think of Antman and the Wasp Quantumania? Be sure to, talk about it down in the comments below. Let's have a discussion. And if you enjoyed the film, please leave a like, subscribe. And yeah, that's it, guys. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll see you on the next one.